In Blender, anything that is an object can be scaled or rotated. But in order to scale or rotate something, we need a reference point. This is our pivot point where we can scale from or rotate from. We can change this pivot point to alter how we scale and rotate our meshes. So let's have a look at the pivot point and its uses in Blender. So we have our default cube, and to know what our pivot point is, we have to come down to the info bar at the bottom to this icon here. Currently it says pivot center for rotating / scaling median point. If we click, we have 5 options. For this lecture, we're going to focus on the median point, individual origins and 3D cursor. Currently, our object's pivot point is the median point. This is the center of the object. So no matter what the shape of the object is, it will have a median point, a center point, where from that point, all of the mass of that object is distributed equally. For a cube, this is very simple. It is dead center in the middle of the cube, because no matter where you go from the center, it is the same distance, the same sort of geometry. From the median point, we can rotate around this median point, and we can scale in towards and out towards this median point. But let's see what happens when we change this to 3D cursor. So we're now going to change the pivot point to the 3D cursor. Now if we rotate now, nothing appears to have happened. If we scale now, seems to be the same. But of course, as we know, the 3D cursor is by default in the same place as the gizmo, as the origin, as the pivot point. So we need to move the 3D cursor to see its effects. So if I move the 3D cursor over here, and now I rotate, so I'm going to press R, we can see it rotates and it actually moves our object around that 3D cursor. This is particularly useful when creating things like animations, where you're creating things like jumping animations. A very powerful tool. The same applies to the scaling effect. By dragging out, we move our cube away from the pivot point while increasing its size. By dragging in towards the pivot point, we can see that we are decreasing in size. So we can already see that there's a profound difference just by changing the pivot point from the median point to the 3D cursor. But what about individual origins? Well, let's see how this works. In order for us to make use of individual origins, we actually need to have more than one object or more than one part of a mesh selected. So let's do this now. We're going to, first of all, set our origin back to the way it was. So we currently have our origin here, which is also our gizmo, and we're going to set it back to our geometry, which we have done. But we need to center our pivot point back to the median point. There we go. We're also going to press Shift and S and bring our 3D cursor back. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a second cube, and there we go. So if we select both objects, we can rotate these objects. Notice how that with two objects, the median point is the center point in terms of the distance between the two. So we can now pivot around that point. This may be good if you wanted to create, say, your own solar system. You can make the sun your pivot point and rotate all the planets around your sun. If we have a look at scaling, the same applies as earlier when we were using the 3D cursor. But how do we change this so that these are rotated and scaled on their own, not connected to each other? The way we do that is by going to individual origins. Once we click that, if we say rotate, we now find that both of our cubes are rotating as if we were just rotating a single cube. If we press S to scale, even in scaling, it appears to be normal, it's just that we're doing two at the same time. So again, some very powerful tools there for us to use. So guys, that was the pivot point. I'm sure you would have gotten plenty of thoughts about the sort of things that you can do just by changing your pivot point. It can make such a big difference to certain projects. As I said, some great examples would be creating your own solar system. That would be a fantastic project to do if you're going to practice using the pivot point. So, thanks a lot guys, and I will see you in the next lecture.